Hello there. This video will detail the disassembly and rebuild of a Daystate Red Wolf. We'll go through the disassembly procedure and mention any key features or points that you need to watch out for when disassembling the rifle, as well as giving you a little understanding of how exactly the rifle works. There's just a couple other things I want to mention before we start. Now, this particular rifle is an older model, and there may be some very minor differences between this one and the later models. And similarly, this is a sub 12 model, so some differences may be present between the FAC and the sub 12 models. These, however, will be incredibly minor. Next thing I want to mention is on the battery. Now, before work commences on the Daystate Red Wolf, it is advised that you leave the rifle overnight without the battery connected to allow the capacitors inside the rifle to discharge properly. This is just a safety procedure, but I'll show you how to disconnect the battery now. So I've already done this to save a little bit of time, but if your battery was still connected, you would open the battery port at the back here and pull out these two wires. However, I've already disconnected my one, so I'll pull the battery out. Here we have the first difference. This is the old style battery. The newer ones are a little thicker and they don't have this rubber O-ring around the outside. They also have a slightly different connection. So I'll close that gently for now. And we'll just go over briefly the tools that you're going to need to do this job. Firstly, you're going to need a good quality set of Allen keys ranging from 1.5mm to 5mm. You'll also need an 8mm Allen key as well as a 0.89mm Allen key. Other than that, you'll need a set of long nose pliers, a soft face mallet, an open-ended 22mm spanner, a 5/8 ring spanner, the small 3-pin anti-tamper tool, as well as a couple flat-bladed screwdrivers, 1.5mm long head and a 3mm wide head. Another couple tools that are handy to have on hand are a set of tweezers and a few magnets. With that all out of the way, we can begin the disassembly. So first thing we're going to do is remove the stock, and that's done by loosening this bolt in the bottom. That's done with an 8mm Allen key. When you take the stock off, it is advised to open the battery connection and just make sure that the wire follows through the stock nicely and doesn't get caught. There it is there. So I'll put the stock to one side and we'll start disassembling the rifle. Once the stock has been put in a safe position, we can degas the rifle. I've already done this to save us a little bit of time, but on your rifle what you're going to need to do is loosen the Foster fitting. That's done with a 5/8 ring spanner. Just crack it loose, and a couple turns with the spanner, you should hear the rifle start to hiss between the Foster fitting and the block. You should leave the rifle until it totally degasses itself of air. You can tell that by the rifle will stop hissing and the Foster fitting itself will become loose. If there's still resistance in the Foster fitting, it means there's still air in the rifle. But I've already done it to save some time, so we can just undo the Foster fitting by hand. With the Foster fitting removed, we can push the one-way valve out the end. So using a 1.5mm Allen key, that pushes out the piston. This is a one-way valve in this rifle, and if this O-ring is leaking, that's how you remove it. We're going to leave this as one piece for now and we'll stick this to the side. Once that's removed, we can remove the bottle from the rifle. Without any pressure in the bottle, it should unscrew nice and freely. Here it is there. We do also have an O-ring on the front. We will take that off as well. There it is there. We'll stick it to one side. I will be going over all the O-ring sizes in the reassembly portion of this video. For now though, we're just going to be taking them out. If we look on the bottom here, we see a silver cup in the bottom of the front valve. We need to knock that out. So it should come out with just a gentle tap of the action. So there that is there. We'll take that out so it doesn't get lost. Next we can remove the barrel, and this will just make it a little easier to manipulate for the camera. So using a 2.5mm Allen key, these two screws here, you just need to loosen these, they don't need to be done all the way. Here we have the barrel. So we'll take the shroud apart now as we've got it out. First thing we're going to do, flip the shroud over and locate these two screws in the side. we're going to take them out with a 2.5mm Allen key. Once they are out, we can pull the carbon shroud up. This could be done while the barrel was still in the block, but there we have it. Carbon shroud is out fully, and we have two things we can take off the barrel. Firstly, this carrier at the back here. So with a 2mm Allen key, we're just going to undo these two grub screws here. These don't need to be done all the way. That can just be slid off the barrel there. Again, we'll go over the O-ring sizes in the reassembly portion of the video. After that, we can unscrew this end piece. These can be sometimes quite tight. If they are excessively tight, a nice big Allen key in the middle there and just gently crack it loose. And there we have it, there's the bare barrel. This one is a 2-2. We do also have a couple O-rings around the breech end there, and also a breech seal. So now we can bring the block back. And the next thing we're going to remove is this plastic cover on this side. So using a 3mm wide flat bladed screwdriver, we're going to undo these 3 screws. Once all 3 are undone, we can lift the plastic cover off and put this to one side. This exposes the electronic board, and we need to disconnect a few things in order to take the trigger assembly off. The first thing we're going to do is disconnect the coil by unscrewing these 2 screws here. Again, that's using a 3mm flat bladed screwdriver. So you don't need to undo these all the way, they are just electronic connections, so loosening them off is good enough. Like so. Next, we're going to disconnect the pressure sensor. So the pressure sensor is this 3-pin connection up here. And to remove that connection, we're very carefully going to tease the wires up and pull the connection out. Like so. Just bending the connection out of the way. Next, using a 5mm Allen key in the base here, we're going to loosen this screw. Like so. Doing so allows us to take the trigger unit off as one piece. There's the screw there. While we've got this off, we'll take this apart now. So we'll put the block to one side and start the work on this piece. First thing we're going to do is remove the plastic trigger guard. That's done by using a 3mm Allen key in these 2 screws here. There we have it. There's the trigger. Using our 1.5mm Allen key, what we can do is push this pin out, this one here, and on this side using a set of pliers just to grip the pin and pull it out. That allows us to remove the trigger entirely. So this is the trigger here. I'll just go through the adjustments quickly. This one at the front is the first stage adjustment. This one in the middle here, or the second one in, is the trigger weight adjustment. The third one in is the trigger stop position. This shouldn't need to be touched as it's set from the factory. And then this final one at the back here is the second stage. We do also have some trigger blade adjustments. So if we loosen this screw on the side here, using a 1.5mm Allen key, that allows the trigger blade to be slid up and down this little dovetail here. The second adjustment we have is using a 0.89mm Allen key. We can get in the side there, loosen that grub screw off, and that allows us to move, rotate and reposition the trigger blade itself. There it is there. You do need to be extremely careful, as that Allen key there is extremely small and quite easily either rounded out or stripped out. So just a light nip up is good enough. We will take out the trigger spring for now. And as you can see there is a small brass top hat on the bottom of that, so just be careful that that doesn't get lost. But we'll stick this whole assembly to one side. Next we can take the trigger switch out. So using a flat bladed screwdriver, just unscrew these 2 screws here. Once they're unscrewed, we can tip the screws out. And then disconnect the trigger switch at the back here. Now these wires are incredibly small and fragile, so if you can, just use your fingernails to gently tease up the plastic part of the connection rather than tugging on the wires themselves. Then we can fish out the trigger switch from the base there. There that is there. Next we'll take the other side's cover plate off, so these 3 screws here. And again that's being done with a 3mm wide flat bladed screwdriver. Nice and carefully pull the plastic cover off and we're left with the board on. There is an insulating pad on the base of the board, so this clear plastic piece here, so just be careful of that. Before it can come off completely though, what we need to do is disconnect the safety switch. Again, using our fingernails, just teasing up the connection and pulling it off like so. And then the trigger bracket here can be removed. We'll stick that to one side. We can lift the insulating piece up, this clear plastic piece here, also stick that to one side. Then remove the battery wire, like so. This one, as I said earlier, is the older version. There is a slightly newer version with a different connection for the battery. So we'll stick this to one side. And that's the board fully disassembled. Take a good look at it there. This particular one is the GCU1, although the newer boards are GCU2s, they've got it written on them. For now though, I'm going to be storing the board in an anti-static bag. There we go. The last thing to take off of the trigger bracket here is the safety switch. So to remove the safety switch, placing our finger over these 2 nuts here. Using a flat bladed screwdriver we can undo these 2 screws. We can lift out the safety switch and we can let the nuts fall out, those 2 there. And that's the trigger bracket fully disassembled. And next thing we'll take off is this front block here. So using a 4mm Allen key, just crack the 4 bolts that hold the front block on. Once they're loose, I'm swapping over to a ball-ended Allen key just to make it a little easier or a little faster to remove the screws. The 2 screws on the bottom are considerably longer than the ones on the top, so just be mindful of that as you take them out. The front block is being pressed on by a spring, so it may be necessary to just lightly pinch the front block with your fingers while you take the last screw out, or the front block itself might work its way forward. Once all screws are out, we can very gently work the front block loose. And there we have it there. There's the front block fully removed. And we can stick this to one side. Next we'll take a look in the end here, and using a set of long nose pliers we can just lightly grip the valve spring and pull the valve out. This is the valve pin, or the firing pin. This pin would be different on the FAC models. On the FAC models they use a slightly different arrangement with a pressed on Delrin shuttle over the end there, whereas the Sub 12 rifles are a little smaller and they use a valve seat, a peak valve seat in the actual valve assembly itself there. Next we can remove the pressure sensor, and we do that by using a 22mm spanner. So these can be quite tight, so just be careful as you put the spanner on and crack it loose. There we have it there. It does have a small doughty wash on the base, although we're not going to be taking that off. So we'll stick this to one side. Now we can get on to the mechanics of the rifle. So first thing we're going to do is remove the cocking arm, and we're going to do that using a 2.5mm Allen key in this back screw here. Once that's loose, pull the bolt out, and then the cocking arm can be pulled out. Now there is a spacer here that we need to be careful of, as it will drop out if we're not careful. So there's the cocking arm and pellet probe assembly there. We will be taking this apart very shortly, although there's one or two more things in the block. So we'll stick this to one side for the time being. The next thing we need to remove is this back plate here. So this cover plate, we do that by loosening these two screws in the block. That's done using a 2mm Allen key. These don't need to be done out all the way, just cracked loose will do, and then using the Allen key, just press on the side of the screws and push the cover plate out. Some can be quite tight, that one was quite tight actually, but we can stick this to one side. This is just a cover plate to cover the side of the block if you decide to swap the cocking handle over. With that out, we'll bring back the cocking arm and we'll resume the disassembly. First thing we're going to do is remove this little spacer in the end here. So we can just push that out and that comes out like so. Next we'll remove these two bolts here. That's done using a 3mm flat-headed screwdriver. So we'll remove this one first, and the best thing to do to remove this is put a little bit of pressure on the arm like so, and that just stops the screw from being pinched between the two surfaces. And using a set of long nose pliers we can just pull the screw out like so. Here the pellet probe comes. We do also have a spring and a ball bearing in the end here. So with a set of tweezers we're going to gently pull the ball out. There the ball is there. And we're also going to take out the spring. There that comes there. The last thing we can do is remove the cocking arm. And to do that we're going to be using a 2.5mm Allen key in the screw here. There that is there. Next, first thing we're going to do is remove the ball bearing in this larger hole here. Easiest way to do that is just simply flick the safety. When you flick the safety, the ball should pop out like so. So there's the ball there. After that's done we come to probably the most important part of the whole disassembly. So before you undo these two screws, this one here and this one here, well there is one under this anti-tamper, but these two screws cannot be undone until we get a small spring and a ball bearing out from this hole here. If you try to do that, what will happen is you'll undo these two screws, go to pull the safety out and it will get jammed. The only way to get it out after that is by yanking it and breaking the spring in the end here, which obviously you don't want to do. The easiest way I've found to remove this spring is quite simply with an Allen key and a little stack of magnets. So if we pop the Allen key in the top hole there and connect it to the bottom hole, then using our magnets, snap them on the side of the screwdriver, we should be able to gently pull up and the spring will be stuck to the magnets. Like so. We can do the same for the ball bearing. And there the ball bearing is there. So that's incredibly important to do that before you loosen the two screws on the safety. Next we can loosen the anti-tamper screw. So on the side here you see a 3-pin anti-tamper, and Daystate supply this 3-pin anti-tamper tool. They fit together like so, and I like to use an 8mm socket on the end of a screwdriver and we can loosen the screw. There that is there. We'll do the same for the other side. But same thing on this side. just loosen the anti-tamper screw with the anti-tamper tool provided by Daystate. There we have it there. Once that's done, what we can do is pull this shaft here and pull the safety backwards. There we have it. There is a wavering, or there was a wavering on my one attached to the safety, so just be careful of that. But there, the safety is there. And we'll put that to one side. There's the wavering. This has been replaced on newer models with a thin O-ring, but this is the wavering. It just helps stop vibrations from travelling through the block, creates a bit of vibration absorption, and it acts as a spacer between the safety and this dowel rim piece in here. Firstly though, we'll slide out the hammer. This is the hammer and the hammer return spring here. So there it is there. Next, we see this dowel rim piece here. This is just a spacer and a hammer housing. So there it is there. And next we have the coil. So to get the coil out, we have to carefully bend this wire down through the hole there, being very nice and careful. And then we can slide the coil out, like so. There is also a spacer here, and this spacer just helps protect the block. And finally, the core itself can actually be disassembled by just taking this steel outer sheath out, but we're going to be leaving it on for now. So there that is there. The last thing we can remove from the block itself is the valve core. So to get the valve core out, we need to loosen these two bolts. So that's done with a 2mm Allen key. This plate is acted on by a spring, so just be careful as you undo it that it doesn't spring out. But there's the two bolts there. And then using a set of tweezers, we can pull the spring out. There it is there. And then we can pull this pin out. And in my case, the pin and the little housing came out as one piece with the O-ring on the bottom. If we take the O-ring off, this pin can come out of this little cup here. Now this is the old style of magazine indexing system. Every time the rifle fires, a small puff of air pushes this pin up, and that used to push on a ratchet that allowed the magazine to rotate round. Newer Red Wolves don't have this, they just have a blanked off hole in the valve core itself. So this is sort of an older style. You can update this style of valve core to the newer type by just getting a blank one of these, and it just replaces this entire assembly. Although this is an older one, so that's what we've got in this rifle. The last thing we can do is push the valve core out of the block. So if we look in the bottom, we see 3 holes. We're going to be pressing on either the top or the bottom with a nice thin Allen key. In this instance I'm using a 2mm. So nice and carefully press on the block until it pops out the end there, like so. There is an O-ring on the base of the valve core, as you can see there. But there that is there. Next thing we can remove is the valve seat itself. That just hooks out. So this is a peak centre with a O-ring outside. And when installed in the rifle, the firing pin goes through the centre there and seals on the inside of the peak. When the rifle's fired, the valve is knocked off its seat and air is able to flow through the hole there and up through the transfer port and into the back of the barrel. So there it is there. And here is the valve core. There it is there. On newer models, as I said before, this drilling isn't here. It's just a counter bore with no through hole. However, this is an older style valve. Right, and there we have it. There is the block fully 100% disassembled. There still are some stickers, so this sticker here and this sticker here, although I'm going to be leaving them on as they don't need to come off. With the rifle fully disassembled, I thought we'd give a brief explanation of how exactly the Red Wolf works. When we pull the trigger, it tells the board to send a pulse of electricity to the coil which energises it. When the coil is energised, it acts like an electromagnet and pulls the hammer through it, like so. The hammer then hits the firing pin here, and the firing pin is forced backwards, de-seating it from the valve seat, and that allows a blast of air to travel through the transfer port up through the barrel. So it's a rather simple design, but one that works very, very well. When taking apart the Red Wolf, you may have noticed that we didn't actually take apart a regulator. This is because the Red Wolf is electronically regulated. What this means is that the board reads the pressure inside the bottle using the pressure sensor, and it uses that information to regulate the hammer strike. So the hammer strike, or the amount of energy that's sent to the coil, is dependent on the pressure inside the bottle. This allows us to have a flat feet per second velocity curve without having to have a mechanical regulator. So that's just a brief explanation of how the Red Wolf works. What we'll do now is I'll get this cleared away and we'll go over some brief troubleshooting tips. Right, next I thought we'd go over some troubleshooting tips. So I've laid out most of the components that may cause you a little bit of a problem, and what we'll do is we'll explain a few of the problems and go through the solutions and causes. Red Wolves aren't known to be unreliable guns, but they still do need a service once in a while, and these areas are all well within the realms of a competent service agent. So first thing we'll do is start with the barrel. The barrel has 3 O-rings on it, 2 on the outside and 1 on the inside. If one of the 2 outer O-rings has been compromised, you may feel a puff of air coming from either the front of the block here or the middle of the block here. Air will be able to pass through these O-rings and travel out to atmosphere, so you may feel a puff of air if one of those 2 are broken. Similarly, the breech seal in the end here, if that is broken or compromised, what you'll feel as you fire the rifle is a puff of air as the pellet leaves the barrel. So none of these O-rings are under constant pressure, they only seal up when the rifle is fired. So if you feel a puff of air coming from anywhere in the barrel assembly when the rifle is fired, you may need to look at these 3 O-rings. The next place that can cause you a couple problems when you fire the rifle is the magazine indexing pin itself. When the rifle is fired, a small puff of air comes up through this hole in the valve core, and that pushes on this pin here and lifts it to index the magazine, or it did on older models. However, this is no longer needed with the newer magazines. Although after time, these pins here can become broken or get broken in general use, and once they are broken, it can cause a little puff of air to come out of the top of the block, so from here, once the rifle has been fired. So that's another area to look at if you're feeling a puff of air when the rifle is fired. So next we'll talk about some areas that can leak. So the first place we're going to be talking about is the join between the 2 front blocks here, so the front of the block and the front block itself. So if there is a leak between these 2 places here, what you'll be able to do is test that by dripping some soapy water or some oil across this gap and watching to see if the bubbles appear. If bubbles appear, that means these 2 O-rings have failed and need to be replaced. Another area on the front block that can cause problems is the one-way Foster fitting valve. So we take a look at this here, we see this O-ring here. This can fail and cause air to leak out of the Foster fitting itself, and to test that all you would do is drop a little bit of soapy water or oil over the end there and see for bubbles, or check for bubbles. If it's bubbling, that means this O-ring needs to be replaced. We do also have a Doughty washer here, although Doughty washers are normally pretty good and don't normally cause leaks, although you can test that as well, similarly by dripping either soapy water or oil over the joining face of the 2 areas there. Next we'll talk about the valve core. So the valve core has these 2 O-rings around the edge, and only this one is under constant bottle pressure. If this one is leaking, what will happen is air will be able to pass through the valve and travel up through the transfer port and down the end of the barrel. So the easiest way to check if this one is leaking is by putting a rubber glove or a balloon over the end of the barrel. This will not only check this O-ring but also check the valve face. If the valve face is leaking, a similar issue will occur, so air will be able to pass through the gap between the valve face and the peak sealing disc here, and that will also allow air to pass through the transfer port and through the barrel. So if you have a slow leak, what you can do is wrap a rubber glove or a balloon over the end of the barrel, leave it overnight and see if the balloon has inflated. If it has, you need to check both of these O-rings. Apart from that, the only other two things that can leak are the pressure sensor. So the pressure sensor has a Doughty washer on it, and also the bottle. The bottle has an O-ring seal on it, which can also leak, although these two are extremely rare, as normally once they're set from the factory, they're normally good. So as you can see there's really not that many places that the Red Wolf can leak from, and if I'm honest, once they come out the factory, as long as they're not being abused, they're normally quite good. And in the reassembly portion of this video, we will go over the sizes of the O-rings.